Well, I got off the bus in the 8th grade because we had to do testing down there. And all the boys were lined up as the girls got off the bus. And Robert said to his friends, he says, I'm going to marry that girl. And that's how we met. And then we were very competitive in high school. If he was in English, I always did better in English, but he was so good at math that we kind of balanced out, but we were very competitive and we were very good friends. And we didn't date individually like they do today. The girls went with the girls, the boys went with the boys, and we all met at the dances and at these different functions and things. So you really didn't, once in a while you'd go out to movies with somebody, but he never got up the nerve to ask me out until our senior year. Wasn't that right, honey?
Yeah.
Senior year. And that was it. That was all, that's all she wrote.
So you grew up in Grand Lake Stream.
I did. I was born in Grand Lake Stream on October 3rd, 1947, in my grandmother's house. It's the house that burned.
Okay.
And nobody believed my father. They thought he was drunk because he told everybody he had twins. Well, we didn't know we were having twins. And Mama didn't know she was having twins, or Daddy. And I was born first, 3 minutes ahead of Beth. And they had to put me in cold water and then hot water and then cold water because I was turning blue. So they finally got me going, and 3 minutes later out comes Beth with her feet right up over her head like this. So she was a Frank Breach. And my grandfather had picked my name from a, I think it was a country and western singer called Bonnie Lou. And he loved her music, so they had to find another name to go with Bonnie Lou, so they picked Beth Lee. So we were Bonnie Lou and Beth Lee from Grand Lake Stream, Maine. Southern names from the north.
Was there a doctor there? Or?
Dr. Jacob, and he was quite inebriated, as he usually was. But yes, Dr. Jacob was there, and then after the birth, we moved into, there was a little house next to my grandparents. And it is up to Indian Rock Camps now, that shack-like thing in the back, that brown one, that was our house. And the first memory I have of that, we were a year and a half old, and we were sitting in our high chairs. Beth and I remember this today. And our cat brought in a mouse, and Mama jumped up on the table. And there was Beth and I, and she was screaming and screaming and screaming. This little tiny mouse came in. But that's my first memory of growing up.
There were 7 sets of twins in Grand Lake Stream all at the same time.
I was going to ask how many sets of twins were around. I figured you guys were the only ones. Wow.
Pam and McKelvey.
Yep. Pam and Pat.
Pam and Pat McKelvey, and they're related to us.
Okay.
Lila was a Sprague. And
Peter and Pam.
Peter and Pam.
Yep.
I forget who the other sets were.
Didn't the Weatherbees?
No. I don't know, but there
That's
were
unusual.
a few. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
where did you go to school?
Well, we moved to Connecticut when I was 3 years old because there just wasn't any work here. The only work was in the woods, and so we moved to Connecticut. And my father worked for Sikorsky's, and my mother worked.
Singer.
Yeah, I think the same place, Sikorsky's. And so for the first, for 4 years we lived in Connecticut. We were 7 when we came home. And my first school was the Roosevelt School. Well, I went to preschool or a babysitter or whatever it was, but I remember this big black woman. And she had big scabs on her arms and everything. She was the sweetest lady. And she would give us a paintbrush and a can of water, and we would paint the walls of that school. You wouldn't believe it. And we thought we were really painting, of course. And then I remember there was an officer at the when you cross the street. I can't remember his name, but he was so nice, and he'd call us Bonnie and Beth, and he'd walk us across the street and bring us back. And the only other thing I remember about that is that we would have a cookie sale. And do you know those ice cream sandwiches? Well, the Nabisco cracker, they're really hard. And we used to buy those, and Mama would make the ice cream sandwiches for us at the cookie sale. And then we moved home, and we were so excited. When we were little, we'd always leave after work, so we were in our pajamas. We'd had our bath, we were in our pajamas, and Mama would pack sandwiches and things like that, and off we'd take for Grand Lake Stream America. And we were so excited. And I remember coming across Route 6, and it was like 4 o'clock in the morning, and you could, and still I have this same like deja vu when I come across there at that time. And you know, the fog was just lifting, and you could see the lights going on in all the farms, and you knew people were getting up, and there was just this smell. And it didn't make any difference if it was summer or winter, but this was a smell of home. Do you know what I mean? Have you ever? And so we'd come in, and we never told Grammy and Grampy when we were coming because we wanted to surprise them. And I remember one time we were walking in, and we were tiptoeing in, and we were very quiet. And Grammy was sitting up in the living room smoking a cigarette. And she says, "Do I hear the pitter-patter of my little girl's feet?" And it would rush in and, you know, just overtake her with, and Grampy, he would be in bed. He wouldn't get up till morning, but yeah, those were, I remember those days were good. And growing up in Grand Lake was good.
Yeah.
You know, we were very blessed.
What were some activities you did as kids in Grand Lake?
Well, Beth and I were pretty good kids. I remember one time, we were late getting home. And because we had to be home by dark. I mean, I don't care if you were 8 years old or 18 years old. Everybody went out. I mean, all the kids. You had anything that Beth or I or any of the kids did, our parents knew it before we could get home. And everybody watched out for everybody's kids. Well, this one evening, we used to call the rocks up there at Madawaska, you know, the big rocks there, we used to call that the hotel. And there were trees around it so that it would kind of hide you in there. So we were up there smoking with Sophie. Brenda had stolen her mother's cigarettes, and we were up there smoking. And of course, I didn't like it at that time. I was coughing and everything. So we come home, and Mama said, "Where have you girls been?" And I looked at Beth. Never lied to Mama. Up Middlewalk smoking. Up Middlewalk. And Mama says, "Well, what were you doing up Middlewalk?" And we said, "Smoking with Sophie." And she said, "Did you like it?" And we said, "No." And she says, "Then don't do it again." That was it. And like if we wanted to go to the drive-in with Brenda and them, it was probably just Brenda, but we'd always say Brenda and them, including other people. And my mother would say, "Well, do you think you need to go to the drive-in tonight? You know, you have to clean those tables after dinner tonight, and you have to set up for breakfast in the morning." Well, the people lingered and lingered and lingered in the dining room. And she says, "Okay, go ahead and go." So we went. We came home. All the dishes were done. The dining room was cleaned and all set up. And my mother had worked all day long from about 5 o'clock in the morning. And I know it must have been 9 o'clock before she got into bed. That's who my mother was. You know. But we did lots of things. We played baseball. I remember one time, we'd use the swing set a lot, and the boys, we didn't realize it, were up in the windows watching our, because we had to wear skirts back then, watching our skirts go up. And we'd have little arguments, like Dickie Callaghan. He was a good one, because he was kind of a smart head, smart mouth. And he said something to me, and I said, "I ought to knock your head right off." He says, "Come on out in the ball diamond." So I went out with the ball drum, he hit me in the eye, and I went home with a great big black eye. I never picked on Dickie Kelligan again, I'll tell you that. So we do those things, and always up to the dam. I mean, we would swim from pier to pier. We would water ski. We were friends with all the kids that came in to town, like the Perrys and what was that? Paul Runge. All those kids we were friends with. So we'd all meet, and all we'd do was walk around town. And I remember there was a takeout out the road that I think Ma Williams had. So we'd go out there and get something to eat, and then Maxine, no, not Maxine, Annie Fitch, on her front porch, she had a little takeout. So we'd go over there and eat French fries, and with vinegar. You know, they only ate with gravy over in Canada.
Yeah.
I didn't like that. But, so we do things like that, just walk the streets, and sometimes we'd get up in Weatherby's trees, and people would walk by, and they wouldn't know we were up there, and we'd listen to their conversations, and, you know, or we'd make a noise, and they didn't know where it was coming from. It was so much fun. One time, we did raid Weatherby's garden, and Mama found out, and I had to go and tell them. And then one other time, we soaked Weatherby's screens on Halloween. So my mother asked us about it, that Weatherby's screens were soaked. Did you girls help? Of course, we didn't lie to Mama or Daddy. Yes, we did. So
Okay.
where was I before that thing shut off? Oh,
You were taking the brush down. Yep.
Yes, because we had soaked those screens. So we had to take a brush down, and we not only had to do the screens we soaked, we had to do all the screens that were soaked at Weatherby's. Learned a lesson there.
You didn't get even with the other kids?
Huh?
You didn't get even with the other kids?
No. We never told on anybody, ever. We took our own punishment, and that was that. You know, so we never got a spanking or anything like that, but we did have to rectify it. And it's bad enough to have to go and tell Alice Weatherby that you soaked her screens. But you know, Alice and Bev really liked Beth and I. You know, we were both the only ones that Diana could play with in town, so. I remember one time, of course, you know, I'm not fancy, never have been. My father's not fancy, my mother's not fancy, but I was invited to Weatherby's for dinner. And it had been raining, and I was probably about 11, and I got all dressed up with my Sunday go-to-meeting clothes. And I went there, and so I was waiting for Diane to come down from getting dressed upstairs, and I was sitting on that back porch. And these sports came by, and they said, "Hi, how are you?" And I said, "I'm fine." I says, "It's kind of muggish out tonight, don't you think?" They just laughed and kept on going. I was being such a smart ass, you know, I was being privy, or whatever you call it. And we'd go to Caribou Rock, of course, and jump off that, and then we'd go up to where our camp is, and we'd swim on those ledges because it just goes out gradually.
Yeah.
And we had the bestest time ever.
Did you ever jump off the boathouses?
Oh, absolutely. Beth never did. Beth never jumped off the dam. I always jumped off the dam, and we'd swim underneath, and you know, the water. But Beth, she'd swim underneath from the other side. And but I always jumped off the dam until they filled it with rocks.
Yeah.
And the boathouses.
Yeah.
Especially the first one. Is that yours? Whose is the first one?
Oh, that's Bob Clark's.
Oh, that one.
Okay.
Mostly.
Yeah.
Because it was the deepest there. But we were always, I learned to swim when Pudmore threw me in the water. It was either sink or swim.
Yep.
Oh, and he used to tease us girls wicked. Oh, terrible. And one time I had this little dog named Mitzi, and she was a Boston Bull Terrier. And she went everywhere. I mean, she'd go on surfboards. If you threw a rock in the water, she'd dive in, pick that rock up, and bring it back. Well, Pud was pushing us around up there. Well, Missy started after Pud, put him up a tree down Middle Walk. She didn't take to that much. And one time Brent was jumping off the wharf, and she had this ruffled bathing suit. Of course, Brenda always had the cutest bathing suit, a little bikini thing, with ruffles all in the back. She was so cute. Anyway, Mitzi thought those ruffles were wonderful. So she went to jump off, and Mitzi grabbed her right by the ass, went right in with her ruffles and all. It was funny. Brenda didn't appreciate it, but it was funny back then, you know.
Remember when Pud Moore, they stopped the school bus in Princeton at Legacy and Savage for gas or something. And who was it? Horace White
Horace
was
White.
driving the bus. And while he was in the Legacy and Savage, Pud stole the bus and took the kids to school.
Oh, they were, Kathy Moore had this dollhouse that her grandfather had built her. It was darling, had little sinks and cupboards, and the house was sitting here and that dollhouse was right there. A little picket fence and everything. And we used to pretend that our husbands were Kenny Sprague, Roger Milligan, who was the other one? Oh, Johnny Brown. I mean, we all had these older boys. Oh, they were so handsome. They didn't give two hoots for us. But, you know, back then, everybody played together. Girls, boys, all ages. I mean, we played with Pete and Pam and with Chris. We played baseball. All those kids, all of the kids in Grand Lake played together. It didn't make any difference what age we were. We used to have, up where Laura Schaefer is, behind Bumpa's barn. That was Bumpa's, or Bumpa Bagley owned that house there. And we used to go up and back there, and we had bough huts, and our dogs were our horses. And we also had one down behind my grandmother's place. And we were out there one time, and we heard this screaming and this thrashing. We knew it was a bear. We were scared to death. We sung hymns all the way into my we've never been back. Ever been back. We were scared to death. But that's the kind of fun we had. And then in high school, you know, we were involved in the sports and the band and all that stuff. But there wasn't a bus that went back and forth. So we relied on either our parents to come and get us, or we stayed overnight. And the people in Woodland were so good to us, like Joey Manza's mother and just all of them. Kathy McKay's parents, they were just wonderful to us. So we'd stay all the time down there. Kind of got on a Dodge, you know what I mean? Yeah. When you're that age.
So you went to high school in Woodland?
We went to high school in Woodland. Yeah.
Did you do grammar school at all here?
We did all of grammar school here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, from the time I came home when I was 8.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember we had Mrs. White, Agnes White, and I remember one time, Nye Whiting, and Howard Honeywell was the principal.
Yeah.
And he also had the first 2 years of high school, where the town office is now. It was the first 2 years of high school. And Nye Whiting was sitting there doing this with his leg. And Mrs. White told him 3 or 4 times to stop doing that. And she said, Nye, if you don't stop doing that, I'm going to go get Mr. Honeywell. So she went and got Mr. Honeywell. Mr. Honeywell came out. He grabbed Nye by the neck, and I'm not exaggerating. He hung him upside down over that banister by his legs. And he says, are you going to stop now? And I was yelling, yes, I'll stop. Yes, I'll stop.
He'd be in jail now, wouldn't he?
Oh, God, yes.
And he wasn't a big man, Mr. Huddle.
No, he wasn't, but I'm telling you what, he was tough. When Mr. Hunnell said
Yeah.
something, he was a man that demanded respect.
Yeah, he put
And
me
they
up against
respect-
the wall one
yeah.
day, and I didn't give him any more crap either.
Yeah, and then Mrs. White, we would, in the afternoon, we would go down in the basement and we would have square dancing. And Wanda Yates's mother, somebody was asking her, she says, how is Wanda doing in English? She says, I don't know. And she said, well, how's Wanda doing in math? And she said, I don't know. Well, how's she doing in science? I don't know, but I can tell you one thing, she'd be the best goddamn square dancer that ever come out of Grand Lake. That's the kind of characters that were here then, from Compy Bacon to Merle Yates. They were just, they'd all come up and sit on the gas pumps at the store. And when I was a kid, I used to go down and listen to them tell stories on the liar's bench. And so when the opportunity, I always loved that store. Paul and Edith Hoare were so good to Beth and I. We'd go in and Paul would say, would you girls like to have a piece of candy? And, oh, you know, it was only 1 cent candy, but, you know, he didn't offer it to other people. And so we'd go over and I'd always have a molasses chew. And we'd get the candy. And when I went to nursing school, I heard from 3 people in Grand Lake. I heard from my grandmother, I heard from my mother, and I heard from Edith and Paul Hoare. The whole time I was in nursing school. So it was, I loved them right to death. And so when we got the opportunity to buy the store, it was like, I was a little girl again, you know? It was
What year was that?
77,
And we were there for how many years?
20. Yeah, we sold it in 97. When we decided to get married, Bonnie told me I had to go up and ask her parents for her hand in marriage. So I went up to the Indian Rock camps and we were sitting there in the kitchen, and Edith, of course she'd worked all day, and Edith was probably tired. So she finally said, Robert, did you come here for a reason? And I said, well, yeah, I'm glad you asked.
I never thought you'd ask.
Yeah. I said, Bonnie and I want to get married. And Sonny spoke up and said, well, it's okay with me, but I think you're making a big mistake. And he said, if you ever need anything, go to your father, don't come to me, he said. That was,
My father was good to you, though.
oh yeah, he was. Yeah, he was. We had a lot of fun together.
He was a guide and ran the Indian Rock,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
and he built canoes.
He did, and I mean, both of my parents worked very, very hard at those camps, and they were spotless. I mean, we served in the dining room. Mama had white tablecloths. She had water goblets, and you know, the whole bit. It was like going to a nice restaurant. It was beautiful, and we had a lot of fun. Met a lot of wonderful people. I remember one time.
Where was your grandmother's house?
My grandmother's house, it was down back street
Yeah.
where Sammy lives now. That was my grandparents. They had a beautiful house, and I remember this house because it had a big grand piano in it. It was huge, and they were up to the mixed. They were up to
Birches?
the Birches. They were up to the Birches, and the Birches was owned by Sears Roebuck, and they were caretakers at the Birches. And when they were up there, Patsy was like a teenager, and by mistake she left the gas on, and the house and his shop burned. And Joe Sprague,
And Sears Roebuck.
Sears Roebuck, bought him all new equipment.
Yeah.
and he
But
built
all
another
craftsman,
shop.
Yeah, equipment.
Yeah.
Oh, neat.
So, he was a nice man. I remember him.
Now, your dad was born and raised in Grand Lake.
He was.
Was your mother?
No, my mother was born in Brunswick, Maine. And her father worked, he was the controller at the Madawaska mill. He graduated from Bowdoin. And he was the controller at the Madawaska mill. And then the Depression came and that mill closed and he was without a job. And they only had one car, so they couldn't bring all their furniture. They had pianos and marble top dressers and all. The only thing that Granny could bring with her as far as her furniture was her sewing machine. And so they all piled in and went to her Grampy's sister's house. And she, at the time, she was married to a, her maiden name was, no, it was my mother's. Her maiden name was Ingersoll. And her husband died at the age of 22 from appendicitis. And she had like 4 children and couldn't take care of them. So my grandmother was raised by my aunt who had a Christian Science home in Brunswick. And that's how she met my grandfather. Well, they came home to my grandmother's farm. She was a Nealand. It was the Nealand farm out Dixie. And they had horses and, you know, all kinds of things. They all worked the farm. And my mother met my father at a dance at the prisoner of war camps. They would have dances on Saturday night and everybody would go, and that's where my mother met my father.
In Princeton.
In Princeton. My mother graduated when she was 16. She graduated salutatorian. She had no money. She wasn't old enough to go into the service. So she worked in a mill for a while in Princeton that was making toothpicks.
Yeah.
And then she got a job with Furbish's store. And that's where she was. And she came to Grand Lake. My father was drafted. And Grammy was going to have Sammy. And so Grammy asked Mama if she'd come up and help her, you know, take care of Sammy. And so that's when my mother came up. And then afterwards, she worked at Weatherby's. And my father came home from the service, and they were married and moved into that little house. So that's where it all began.
Hell up there.
And then one time they first built the camp up there, he's going in there. We didn't have a road into the camp, so we'd go so far and then walk. And it was really rocky and everything. He says, "Oh my God, Edith," he says, "this is just like the rocky road to Dumplin." Instead of Dublin. He was so funny, but sometimes he would have 2 different pair of socks on, even 2 different shoes on. And you'd say, "Daddy, you got 2 different shoes on." And he'd say, "Well, I got another pair just like him." He was something else. They were the perfect parents. I couldn't have asked for better parents, better grandparents, better people in this town that, all of them. What was the lady that lived on the corner there by the store? A relative, Paul's sister. Anyway, every Halloween, she would make these popcorn balls with the molasses. Oh my God, I couldn't wait to go and get one of those popcorn balls. And we'd stop in, and Morris Brown's mother would have cookies for us. And then we'd go somewhere else and they'd have something for us. Anytime any kid went into anybody's house, they either got a cookie or whatever. And I remember Marion Callaghan's mother up there where the Historical Society is now. That was a little farm up there. We used to go up there and we used to play all kinds of little games like, oh, I see something green. And she would play with us marbles, anything. She was the sweetest lady. And I think she was alone at that time. Her husband was deceased.
When we had the store and I drove the bus, I had 38 kids on the bus.
Wow.
Now there's what, one?
One or two.
Yeah, that's very
One
few.
or two.
Yeah.
And it's kind of sad because, I mean, Tree Fitch was living down there and, oh my goodness, old man Maynard. And he couldn't hear, he had a horn-like thing that he, you know where Kim Vos lives now? Old man Maynard lived there.
Okay.
And he had a wife, and she was a sweetheart. I can't remember her name though. But he would raise goods and bring them to the store to Paul and sell them to Paul, and he would in turn sell them to the community. Well, one time we were talking to him, old man Maynard, and we said, "How are you today, Mr. Maynard?" You know, and he'd say, "Wash your feet." He couldn't hear a damn thing. Wash your feet. Didn't us kids get a kick out of that? But I mean, everybody was so good to us. So good to us. We had so much. I'd like to go back just for one day. Just for one day. Not the day Dickie Callaghan hit me. One of the other days. And then when we bought the store, well, before that, we were in Madawaska. And Robert was working for Civez Corporation. They were putting in a paper machine. And, and that paper machine, half of it was on the Canadian side, and half of it was on the American side. And
The mill was.
the mill was, yeah. And Billy was born on the Canadian side at the Hotel Dieu, which was the name of the hospital. And I couldn't work up there because I couldn't speak French. So this lady, Madame Clavette, Al worked with Robert, and Madame Clavette, and she probably was, at the time she was probably what, in her late 50s, and we were like 20,
Yeah, right.
20 some. So Madame Clavette said to me, "You need to go and learn to speak en français." So I took this class. I took French in high school, but I don't remember a damn thing. And so I went and took this high school class at the high school to speak French. So she said to me, "Bonnie, today we're going out into the community and you're going to speak en français." Oui? And I said, "Okay." She says, "We are going to the meat market." And she says, "You are going to ask for a pound of boudin," which is blood sausage. So I go in with her.
Remember, you're on camera.
I went with her to the meat market, and I said, "Bonjour, monsieur, comment ça va? Ça va bien? Et vous? And blah, 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 blah. What did I want?" And I said I wanted a pound of boudin. And he goes, "Comment?" And I again said I wanted a pound of boudin. And Madame Clavette is going, "Oh, no, Bunny, Bunny, oh, no, Bunny." And so she talked to the man, she got her blood sausage, and out we went. And I says, "What was the matter?" She says, "Do you know what you asked for?" And I said, "No." And she says, "You asked for a pound of a lady's private area." I never went to that meat market again, ever. So that was my last time speaking French.
How long did you live up north?
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
Robbie was just born when we went up. And then 9 months later, 14 months later, Billy was born. So I had my hands full for a while,
Yeah.
the two of them babies.
Yeah.
But I couldn't wait to move home. Couldn't wait to move home. And we lived with Mama and Daddy. We lived with Mama and Daddy, and that's when Robert started guiding. And he guided that whole summer, and then he got a job in the mill. Is that correct?
Construction, yeah. When
Construction.
they were building the craft mill.
Yeah. And then, you know, we moved to Woodland. We had a house in Woodland, and the kids were little there, went to school. Robbie, God love him, he did not want to leave Mama. So I'd take him to school, and before I'd come back, Robbie would be home. He'd run through the backyards and come home. So this went on for a while, and finally I said to, who was the principal then?
In Woodland?
Ferry, Bud Ferry.
Bud Ferry.
I said to Bud, I says, you keep him in school. So that next day, Robbie goes to school, and Bud Ferry gets down and plays cards with him. Pretty soon Robbie hit him over the head with one of the cards and took off for home.
It was the men that came to the post office the most. Your dad came.
Yeah.
Jack came.
Yeah.
You know, they were retired. They probably went to the store and had to sit on the bench and then went to the post office.
And you know, at that time, do you remember when we had the play group?
No, that was a little bit before I came in,
Okay.
but I've heard of it, yes.
That we called ourselves the shoestring players because we didn't have a cent. And we put on a couple of productions. I think 3 years we did this.
Wow.
And it's unheard of for some of these people to take part in this play. There was Marion Kelligan, Barbara Wheaton, there was Piney from up to Topsfield. He has a big farm up there, I forget his last name. And there was
Jimmy Henderson.
Jimmy
Jimmy
Henderson,
Henderson.
myself, Walter Elliott, Claire Wheaton. Oh my God, we just had a full cast.
Yeah.
And we were only supposed to do it 2 nights. And we played like 3 nights for every one of the performances because it was just, and the first one we did was A Bad Year for Tomatoes. And I had the album with It's a Poor Year for Tomatoes of all of our pictures and everything, and those are at the Historical Center
Oh,
now.
neat.
I gave it to Robert to take
Yeah.
to the historical. And then the next year we did individual monologues. And I did, was the bag lady from Lily Tomlin's It's a Something Life.
That was, Bonnie did that as an individual. It was a one-person show. And she did that for a week to a sellout crowd. And it was like 1 hour.
Wow.
Yeah, but the other people did monologues. Mary, they were so funny. They did Who's on First, Marion and Barbara. It was the funniest thing. It was the funniest thing I ever saw. It was so good. And then Claire did an excerpt from It's a Something Life. I can't remember what it is. Lily Tomlin's, and she was the lady talking about French fries and the stores that sell them and what's this world coming to. It was so funny. And then Claire and Jimmy Henderson did. I could see Claire had these socks, and then they were rolled down, like the old woman wearing. She had this old dress on and glasses and gray wig, and when she tried to get up, she go like this would finally stand up. Well, I forget what it was that they did. It was so funny. And Jimmy Henderson was so good. We had so much fun. And then Tracy moved away and we didn't do anymore.
I was gonna say, didn't David Yates' daughter Tracy
Yeah.
have something to do with it? Yeah.
She's my cousin.
Yeah.
The
Is
best
it?
one though was that bag lady thing. That was on the corner of walk and don't walk, right?
Yeah.
And that was you. You did that. That was really good.
Yeah.
It was funny because I had all these layers on, you know, like bad people had.
Yeah.
And I had this, you know, what you put over fruit so the flies don't get at it, those nettings. I had that because I was getting signals through my umbrella hat. And it was funny. It was somewhere there's a video of it. I
Is
have
it
no
really?
idea where it is.
Wow.
I have no idea where
I
it
wonder
is.
who
But
would have that.
I
I
know.
don't know. Maybe Tracy would.
Yeah.
But we had so much fun in Grand Lake. I mean, we used to have, Laura Schaefer, and that's when they were living in the basement of their home. They did that for quite a few years. And we would have potluck dinners in different places each week. And there was Jack and Jackie. There was down at Big Lake.
Earl Bailey.
Earl Bailey, there was Lauren Steve, there was David and Debbie Toby, there was Donnie and Kim Boston, there was Linda and Kenny, I mean, just everybody. And one time, we were over to Laura Schaefer's. Who was that guy that was here that used to hunt here and trap? Bill?
His Tommy, his brother comes now. Randall.
Bill Randall.
Bill Randall.
So we were playing charades, and one of these was a book that Edmund Ware Smith wrote.
The Bush Queer Canoe.
The Bush
Canoe
Queer
Trip.
Canoe Trip. Well, I'm telling you, who had to do that?
I did it.
You did it. It was so fun. Steve Takish and Pat. It was so funny that, I mean, we were hysterical on the floor, laughing. It was so funny. And they decided that they were going to take this Bush Queer Canoe Trip. So Steve had his plane at the time, didn't he? Or how did that go?
I don't know. We had a Bush Queer Canoe Trip when we went to the Allagash, and that's what we called it. So Steve Schaefer. Oh no, we went. The guy up lake here had the plane.
Float plane?
Yeah, but it's a big, like a flying Mack truck. An otter. No, it wasn't an otter, but it was similar. Anyway, it was a big plane.
And Michael Takish went.
They flew us into
David Toby.
Johnson Pond, and we canoed down to Allagash Lake, because you can't land on Allagash Lake.
Yeah.
And we had a really good weekend. We caught a lot of trout, and the people were camping where we were camping, and they hadn't had any luck fishing. And that night, or that day, we fished the mouth of that stream and caught trout. And of course, you're not supposed to do this, but the next day we went out and we used those trout and drifted and caught togue all day long. So anyway,
That's what these main guides.
the Bush Queer.
All these main guides, you know, breaking law.
We can edit that part out.
There were so many guides from Grand Lake. When I was a kid, we used to go up to the dam in the early evening, late afternoon, and watch the canoes come down. Everybody fished Grand Lake.
Huh?
Everybody fished Grand Lake. And watch the canoes come down and the people disembark, and the guides would turn their canoes over, put their motors away in the little
Lockers.
lockers that they had there. And I mean, it was so pretty.
Yeah.
And it was so nice. And that locker building was kept very, very nice when these guys were doing that. And then I think after I went away to school, things changed, you know, during that time, that the guides, because people were breaking into the lockers and, you know, they didn't do it anymore, and the lockers went downhill. Nobody took care of them, and they were defecating and peeing in the lockers. People even staying there at night, and so eventually they tore the lockers down. But that era was a very, very special era. Oh my gosh, I gotta tell you this story. Mike Takish got his guide's license, and this was his first time guiding.
Val and I were down on the dock.
Val and Robert were down on the dock waiting for Michael to come to pick up his people. So being a young kid, he was a very, very young. He probably was, what, 18, Robert?
Not even probably.
No, and yeah, you have to be 18 to take the guys. Anyway, he came down out of the cove, and he turned around by the dock, and he turned too fast, and the canoe went over. Michael paddles, everything. And Val, you know Val, he used to sit like this with his pipe.
Yep.
He was having his pipe, and he looked at the people, and he says, "Your guide's here."
Just as serious.
You guys here.
Poor Mike, I felt so bad for him. Oh, but I mean, that's what I'm saying about characters. Val Moore was definitely.
Oh, yeah.
Pop Moore. My grandfather. I remember when Beth and I would come out of school at noontime, and sometimes we'd stop at Aunt Faye's house, Bill White's wife, and she would be Brenda. She would be having macaroni and tomatoes with butter and salt and pepper on. And we'd call Mama, because we loved it. We'd call Mama, "Can we stay at Aunt Faye's for lunch?" And she'd say, "Okay." And then afterwards, Beth and I'd go over to the store. And my grandfather would be sitting, smoking his pipe on the bench. And we'd say, "Grampy, have you got a nickel?" Because back then, I mean, we might have had a penny, but back then, they had the sodas that went, you know, in those big coolers like this that you put them around, pull them up. You put 6 cents in, nickel on one side and a penny on the other.
They were still there when we bought the store.
Yeah, knee-high and, you know, all those lime and whatever. So we'd say, "Grampy, have you got a nickel?" And every time he'd say, "Well, by jingo, let me see." And he'd dig into his pockets like he was digging for treasure. And he'd be digging and digging. Pretty soon he'd come up with 2 nickels. One for Beth and one for myself. But I remember that cooler. And matter of fact, it was in the store when we bought. It wasn't operating, was it?
Yeah, it was. I get rid of most of them. There were 4 or 5 of those old coolers, and I built that walk-in cooler and took all those out. And when we bought, the perimeter was lined with these glass display cases. And so if you wanted something in the store, you had to ask whoever was tending the store. And we changed that because somebody would say, "Well, I want a pound of coffee," and you'd go all the way over to the other side of the store, get a pound of coffee and come back. "What else would you like?" "I need a box of sugar." Well, it was right beside the coffee. And the kids would come in there, that whole side was all penny candy. And they'd take a half an hour to spend a dime. So we took all those display cases out, opened up the store so people could wait on themselves. And what we built.
Did away with the penny candy. It wasn't a money maker.
No, it wasn't penny candy anymore.
Yeah, but it wasn't a money maker.
No, it
So,
wasn't. No.
We put in, and they had moccasins. I mean, we had everything from apples to zippers in that store.
I remember coming in there. When you were on there.
Everything from apples to zippers. And it's just was such a unique place. And every year I would wash all the wainscoting in that store, in the ceilings, with vinegar and water, and they would sparkle so good, and every week I oiled the floor.
I oiled the floor.
Well, sometimes you
made me.
didn't. Sometimes you didn't, sometimes I had to, but most of the time you did oil the floor.
And you had the post office in there.
Not at the time,
That was later on.
that was later on.
That was when
Yeah,
B
we-
retired.
Yeah. And we just,
We put a bid in
Oh,
on that, right?
tell them about the two-way glass you put in.
We had there was an office in the back corner, and I said to Bonnie, we ought to put one of those one-way glass windows in there.
Because you
that
couldn't see around
If
the
you're working
corner.
in the office, you could see the back of the store, you know, you could see people and, you know, in case somebody took something, I guess.
Yeah.
So anyway, she went ahead and bought the glass, and it was, I think it was $65 for this pane of
He
glass.
complained about it.
And I complained about this $65 for a piece of glass and blah, blah, blah. And so anyway, I built the wall and put the mirror in there, you know, and behind the mirror was the desk. So if somebody was sitting there working, they could see out through there. So I was in the office one day, and there was a girl come in there, and she had a bikini on. And she went up to that window, and I was in the office, and she pulled her top down, not completely, but you know, she pulled it down because she wanted to see how.
Bared her titties.
No, she wanted to see her tan, you know, to see. And so anyway, she went and paid for whatever she bought in the store, and Bonnie waited on her, and I waited. When she left, I said, well, I came out and I said, Bonnie, I finally got my money's worth.
We had so many good times in that store. The people, I loved the people.
You lived right upstairs.
We lived upstairs,
Yeah.
and when we first moved up, there was just, the back end was all
Studs.
rafters and studs.
Yeah, it wasn't never finished.
There was the living room, and there was two small bedrooms that Robbie and Billy had, and a kitchen.
Yeah.
And we slept out there
Yeah.
with electric heaters, and for the first week or so, I could not sleep. That river was so noisy that I couldn't sleep, and it was cold out there. I mean, we moved in February,
Yeah.
and there was no heat out there, and the windows were old out there. So eventually we did the bedroom first and replaced the windows and put a floor in,
So, yeah,
and then
there's two little stories. Anyway, I bought all the sheetrock and I had it on my truck. And the only way to get up there, I built that deck on the back later on, but you had to go up through the middle of the store to get upstairs. And the priest from the Point, I think he was a friend.
Father Harry,
Yeah, Harry, he was, anyway, he was the priest at the Point. And Steve Schaefer and Steve Takish, they all came into the store. So I said, well, I got a truckload of sheetrock, I got to take it upstairs, you know, so I convinced them to help me. So the priest and I had two pieces of sheetrock going up the stairs and around the corner, and he was, I can't tell you what he said, but he was swearing like a drunken sailor, and I thought to myself, he said, this stuff is heavy. And then, so anyway, I sheetrocked the upstairs, and I
they helped, didn't they?
yeah, they helped. No, they didn't. They just helped me get it up there. But I put two windows in on this. Will be the north side of the building. And Kenny Wheaton came into the store there one day, and I don't know if he was asking me, and I said, "Kenny, come on upstairs. I want to show you what I'm doing out back." Well, those two windows that I put in, one of them was an inch higher than the other one. And I didn't notice it until I get it all done, and I thought to myself, God, nobody's going to notice that anyway. You know, Bonnie will put curtains up there, and I said, to heck with it. I just left it the way it was. So Kenny come up the stairs, and he walked into the back room, and he looked over, and he says, hey, he says, one of those windows is an inch higher than the other one. He noticed that right off.
Now, it looks like the store has been added on downstairs, you know, when you go out into the cooler room.
No,
No? That was just the way it was built.
Down cellar?
no,
Down in the
upstairs.
main floor.
No, that was,
Well, that was added on. Paul did that.
Yeah, but we
years
did.
ago.
Okay, you did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see in the picture behind you here, there's a takeout next to the store.
my mother had that.
Yeah, Sonny and I built that in a weekend.
And I'll tell you, she was so busy in that takeout, and she made people just. Carolyn James came up every day for it. She had 2 of them. They were called hot dog deluxes. And the bottom of the hot dog, there, the bun, there was sautéed onions. Then on top of that was sauerkraut. And on top of that went the hot dog. On top of that went the mustard and the relish, whatever anybody wanted. And on top of that went bacon pieces. That was so good. But she had French fries and milkshakes and all kinds of things. And she had ran that for what, 2 years, 3 years?
People came from all over the place to
Just-
eat there.
I bet.
Yeah, and then Mama went to Europe with Aunt Edna. And Beth was to tend the takeout. Well, Beth doesn't, God love her, doesn't do anything for too long because if she don't want to do it, she's not going to do it. So she was getting sick of that, so she closed the shop up, and that was the end of that.
Sold it when she came home.
She sold it to Debbie and David Toby, and they headed up to the dam.
Yeah.
I swear that Edith never made any money because she was, but what was more important to her was a compliment, and she was an awful good cook.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't wait to go up to the Indian Rock camps or to that takeout or any place that she was cooking a meal, because it was.
She did everything well. She was a great seamstress. We were in high school and it was our freshman frolic. And Mama said, what do you want for a dress? She says, I want you to look in the Sears Roebuck catalog and tell me what dresses you want. So we did, and I picked out mine. Mine was purple. It was the same dress, because Beth and I always decided we were going to dress alike. And Beth's was lime green or green. Mama sent for the materials. She had no pattern. She made the exact dress for Beth and I for our freshman frolic. After that, we bought dresses, but that's the type Mama was.
Yeah.
You know, she was just so good at everything.
Do you know what year? Do you remember what year she had the takeout down by your store?
Oh God,
Gee, I don't know.
I don't know either.
It was. Let's see, we bought it in '77.
79 or 80,
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah.
but
That takeout sure moved around a lot too.
yes, it did. Do you remember Jumpy,
No.
the one he had Tourette's?
Oh yes, yes.
My
Shane.
father said, "Geez," he says, "we better stand back when he gives us that hot dog, or it might go over the dam." But God love him, and I mean he can help it. He
Yeah.
had Tourette's, but Laura Schaefer didn't know this, and she came into the store. She was standing at the counter. I can't remember what his first name was.
Shane.
Huh?
Shane.
Shane, yes. And Shane was standing next to her, and she was getting something. Well, all of a sudden, Shane let one of those, what? Laura Schaefer, she practically jumped across the store. It was the funniest thing I ever saw.
Did he swear too when he did it?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
did. But then afterwards, I told her. He was a kind guy. He really was.
Yeah.
One other time was so cute. There was a bunch of hunters in the store, and Debbie Toby came in, and what's the youngest ones? Not
Jessica.
no.
No.
What's the middle one?
Heather.
Heather.
Oh, yeah.
Heather came from anybody, and every day we're learning. But for me, it's just not the same. You know, we'd have dances down to the schoolhouse, and we'd have, you know, like I said, the potluck dinners, and we'd have game night in which we'd play these silly games like charades. And I don't know, it's just, I miss that.
Annie Fitch calling out bingo.
Yes, we did very well for the town
Yeah.
on bingo. Oh, I gotta tell you a story about that. My father, Mama didn't let him lay out his clothes. Mama always picked his clothes for him. And so she'd make sure that he had the socks that matched the shirt and everything like that. Well, Mama and I had gone to bingo because I was calling and she was doing that other stuff that the person did there. And so Daddy got dressed on his own. Well, Mama had this black Angora sweater that had leg of mutton sleeves that came down, and they had little pearls on here, and it had a little collar with all these pearls down here. Well, Mama had decided she wasn't going to wear that because it would be too hot, so she laid it on the bed. Well, he come down to bingo, and Mama says to me, just like this, she says, "Don't say a thing, but look, get a load of your father." And I turned around. I saw him with that sweater on. And he come down over the stairs. And who was it that said something to him? Oh, she was from Princeton. Oh gosh, she used to play bingo all the time.
Yeah.
She was a...
Her husband worked for Olin Dwelly.
yes. They were divorced, and she lived right on the right in that trailer there. Oh, I can't think of her name.
Yeah.
Holland.
Maholland.
Oh, Mary.
Mary Maholland. And she said, well, she swore. Well, she says, "I've seen everything." Well, this is the first time I've ever seen anybody with an Angora sweater for a man. It was so funny. Everybody laughed. My father didn't bother him the least bit. He sat right down, got his cards, and my mom says, "Don't say a word, but get a look at what your father's got on." He was something else, I'm telling you.
I've seen some pictures of them dressed up like for a Halloween dance and
Yeah.
stuff. Pretty cute.
One time, Mom and I dressed up. Nobody knew who we were. We went around to these houses, just Mom and I. And we went to Marion Callaghan's house. Well, she could not think of who. We didn't say a word. Mama had a bottle in her thing. She had this old overcoat on. And, oh, it was so funny. Never said a word. Mama would take the bottle up. Like this. Mama didn't drink like that. And I don't think today she even knew who we were. We had so much fun. We always had fun, Mama and Beth and I. Yeah.
Leslie Brown, he was a caretaker for Mrs. Paul's Frozen Foods.
I remember that.
And so we were guiding them, and we were invited up for dinner that night. And they had soft shell crabs, and I don't know what else. But anyway, I don't know if it was Mrs. Paul. What were their names? Mrs. Paul Frozen Foods was the company. But anyway, the crabs were ready, and Leslie got up from the table because he'd already eaten, so he had his belt undone, you know, and because he ate too much, apparently. And he went out and he got a big platter of those crabs, and he was bringing them in, and he just got in the archway between the kitchen and the dining room, and his pants fell down around his ankles. And Leslie, being Leslie, he just looked down and he waddled over to the table, put the crabs down, picked up his pants and sit back down. Didn't bother him a bit.
P6?
P6? Yeah, I guess that was it, yeah.
Close to it anyway.
Yeah. Anyway,
But I'll tell you, Grand Lake is a very, very special place. I used to say to Robert, don't let me die in Arkansas, just bring me home to Maine. Because I was born here, I'm gonna go out here, and I wouldn't have changed my life for anything in this world. I have so many friends and acquaintances, and it's just been a wonderful life. And right now I'm dealing with some pancreatic cancer, but I've had to take another round of chemotherapy, but I'm doing well. I couldn't have mine done last week because my white blood count is very low, and so is my platelets. But I've been making these special juices, and I'm telling you, my white blood cells are going to go through the roof when I go back in 2 weeks, because I'm here to stay for a while.
We want to do this again in another 10 years or so.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's not metastasized anywhere. It's just sitting there. They can't do surgery because there's a portion of it that is in the duct there, and they're afraid if they do surgery, it could break off a piece and go to the aorta. So that's why they can't do it. And this seems to be keeping it at bay, so I'm good with that. I do everything. You know, I feel good. I feel really good. I'm not so pretty now.
Oh yeah, you look the same.
Because I've lost all my hair, but you know, too much is put on hair.
Yeah.
It's not that important, I've decided. But this is the first winter that we've been here in Grand Lake, and I have enjoyed it.
Nice.
So I missed it so much. We were going to Florida for the last 4 or 5 years, and I like being home. I like being in Grand Lake. I like seeing the deer. I like seeing the turkeys, even though Abby Sue used to drive the turkeys away, which I was glad because they poop all over the place. But so now I have to go out and say, get, like that. But I love watching the squirrels chase each other and the birds coming and the deer. We had 25 deer out there at one time last week, Robert?
yeah, off and
Or a
on,
week
yeah.
off and on. So, and I have fed the deer by hand.
Yeah.
You know, they love carrots. So I fed a couple of them, you know, will come, but most of them are shy, as they should be.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be, you know, coming to get.
Well, you also know if you're in Grand Lake Stream and you need something, somebody will be there for you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I remember, I mean, they used to argue on the liar's bench, and they'd get going, and you know, they'd get up from the liar's bench and they'd go home mad and everything, and the next day they'd be cutting somebody wood to put it in there. You know, it was like that. It's not like today.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about Grand Lake, I'm talking about
Everywhere.
the world.
Yeah.
You know, there's too much anger in this world, and if we just loved one another more, you know, it would be a lot better.
Yeah.
And that pertains to Grand Lake too. If we just accepted people as they are
Yeah.
and loved them where they are, then life would be so much easier.
Yeah.
But I haven't been able to get out much as far as, you know, going to some of the things that they have, but I intend to. This summer when they start up, the women's group, I can't go on Mondays because that's the day I have my infusions, but I'm going to start going to some of the things and participate. And I think if I do that, then I'll understand some of the differences that we have.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, part of it is my fault. But you know, I'm stuck in my ways.
It's a change.
I'm stuck in my ways. I can't help it.
Well, we're almost out of battery
Okay,
power.
we're good. Thank you for sharing.